Hello and welcome back to The Pisky Trap, a series where we explore the folklore, history and legends from across Devon and Cornwall. Hope everyone's well and you're having a nice start to the summer. Apologies that this episode is a little later than anticipated again, as things suddenly went ridiculously busy here. A big thank you to all of you who've been listening to the series and to all the lovely patrons over on Patreon. Thanks also to those of you who came along to the talk exploring the history of witchcraft in Devon over at the Exeter Phoenix. And to those who came up and chatted afterwards. It was lovely to see you all there. For those of you interested in the subject of Cornish witchcraft, the talk I gave last year on this subject will be making a return this August at the Poly in Falmouth, and that's going to be on Friday the 8th of August. I'll pop a link to that in the show notes. And if you missed the talk on Cornish Piskies, you can also catch that at the Cornwall Folk Festival on the 22nd of August. Right, I think that's about it for news and updates, so let's crack straight on with it. We spend a lot of time in this series looking at particular topics from local folklore, whether it's a Pisky tale, a local ghost story, maybe giants or mermaids and so forth, and often how they're connected with local history or old storytelling traditions. In this instance, I wanted to take a bit of time to focus on a particular place here in Cornwall, somewhere I've always been fond of, but never really looked into its history, and that is the town of Falmouth on Cornwall's south coast. It's a popular place with visitors. It's got this beautiful harbour, and you have these impressive castles of Pendennis and St Maur's on either side. As a university town, there's always lots going on, with plenty of nice restaurants and pubs and arts and music venues, so it's got a really nice atmosphere to it. And I always enjoy going there to give talks and that kind of thing. But as a town, I have to say, I didn't know a huge amount about its past, or the local stories and folklore. That's why I was keen to chat with Will Hazell, who runs Falmouth Uncovered, offering historical tours around the town, exploring a range of local stories and tales from Falmouth's past. In this episode then, you're going to be hearing from our conversation about the history of Falmouth, often the darker side of its history. And I should mention at the outset that some of the themes that we'll be discussing can be quite dark, quite macabre, with some gory details in there, including references to cannibalism. So if that's perhaps not for you, then maybe check out one of the other episodes in the series. Otherwise, without further ado, here's our next episode, Stories from Falmouth. Falmouth, a large and flourishing seaport, contiguous to which is one of the most commodious harbours in England, lies in the deanery and east division of the hundred of Kerrier. It is somewhat remarkable that there is no town in Cornwall of any magnitude, of more modern date, than Falmouth, and no harbour in England of greater celebrity in the annals of antiquity. A quote there from Fortescue Hitchens in his History of Cornwall back in 1824. And as you can tell, he's full of praise for the harbour, which in the 18th and 19th centuries must have been bustling. He also makes reference to Falmouth being of a relatively modern date. And it does seem that just a couple of centuries earlier, there was only a small scattering of houses in this area, compared to the long-established town of Penryn, further upriver. It seems that this all changes in the early 1600s, though, when Sir John Killigrew decides to build and expand the town. Sabine Baring-Gould tells us a little bit about this family, the Killigrews. He says that they were an ancient family here in Cornwall, from the parish of St Erme, and could trace their roots back to Ralph Killigrew of Killigrew in the reign of Henry III in the 13th century. Later in the 14th century, a Simon Killigrew married Jane, heiress of Robert Arwenack, and Killigrew moved into his wife's house, and the family established themselves there. And interestingly, the ruins of the fortified manor house of Arwenack are still there if you're walking from Falmouth town station into town. The castle at Pendennis had already been built back in the 1540s as part of Henry VIII's coastal defences, but then in 1613 Sir John Killigrew decides to develop the area around Falmouth, and the story goes that he was inspired to do so by Sir Walter Raleigh. Baring-Gould writes, and I quote, "Sir Walter Raleigh, on his homeward voyage from Guyana, put into Falmouth harbour, and found there, where the town now stands, only a fisherman's cottage. Killigrew, however, hospitably entertained Sir Walter, who expressed his surprise that so fine a harbour should have no accommodation for sailors sheltering there, and when he went to town, memorialised King James on the subject. He had fired the imagination of his host, Sir John, and he also petitioned the king to grant him a royal licence to build 4 houses where Falmouth now stands for the convenience of sailors. And thus, it seems, Falmouth was born. So a little bit of background there, but as someone with admittedly scant knowledge really of Falmouth's history, I thought it best to chat with someone who knows a bit more. So, a little while back, I got in touch with Will Hazell, who runs Falmouth Uncovered, offering award-winning historical tours and a ghost tour of the town. So, one sunny afternoon a few weeks back, we met up in a park in Falmouth to have a chat about Falmouth's history and some of its stories, as well as to talk about the tours and how that project started, the process of researching, what interests us about local history as well. We jumped right into it by talking about a case back in the 19th century surrounding a vessel called the Mignonette. Is it Mignonette?
Mignonette,
Yeah. Is that the 1884 one?
Yes, yeah. Which is a layered, morally complicated, interesting story that I tell in every possible talk, tour, any capacity. I will go into it because it is just so interesting. And you see people that haven't been paying attention start to pay attention because it's just one of those that as a narrative is just so you can't stay out of it. You go in.
Do you think it's just because it's so the macabre nature of it?
The macabre definitely has an appeal to people. I think when I tell it on my history tour, I leave that side out of it, but the ghost tour people like knowing what they did to his body and they like knowing those details for whatever reason. But it's not just the macabre, it's the moral question at the heart of it, because in the story you've got these 4 guys on this yacht sailing from Southampton to Sydney. They face a storm. They're forced into their dinghy to survive. They have with them 2 tins of parsnips, which people always go, tinned parsnips, but I guess they've gone out of fashion. And they are forced eventually, after several weeks, to turn to the custom of the sea, which basically involves eating someone. And their cabin boy has drunk, by his own admission, 3 pints of seawater. That's not good for you. The salt hitting your system and you're that dehydrated. He's clearly on the way out. 2 of the 3 men then draw their knife, do the deed. They eat him, they're rescued, they're dropped off in Falmouth, and there's this kind of, over the day that they're dropped off, there's a kind of multi-stage story in itself as they are taken from place to place. And you can go visit all the locations. As part of the nice thing is that all the buildings that they're in, you can go see them. And they are completely open about what they've done, because they are so convinced. It's the custom of the sea, it's what sailors do. It's not illegal, obviously, so we're not going to lie. We're not going to say, oh, he'd already died, or he fell overboard. No, just here's what happens. And then there's one individual, one policeman, Sergeant Laverty, or Laverty, I'm not sure, but he becomes obsessed with it. He's just like, no, this can't be allowed to stand. He's telegraphing London, asking for permission, and eventually he arrests them. And they get dropped into this huge, great legal drama, which takes place here, Exeter, London. It's a whole big thing, which becomes legally very significant for various reasons. And it's almost a story of two halves. You've got the ordeal of their time at sea for 21 days, and you've got their ordeal at the centre of this media swirl. And it's riven with questions like, was it murder? Was it not? How do you respond? And I've had two blokes on a tour get into an argument about it, where they've like gone at each other about it. Like, no, mate, no. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've clearly done my job. So yes, that's the story, and it's many layers. And the reason why I love it, I think, is there's just so much you could say about it.
Do you think that the era played a factor into this, in terms of maybe that policeman's outlook on it, in terms of this being the sort of Victorian age and lots of questions being raised? Because am I right in thinking there's an earlier, not a similar case, but there is that earlier 1836 case?
Yes, so decades earlier, a whole crew arrived from Falmouth Harbour. They'd eaten several people near Canada before they were rescued, and they're dropped off, and like as usually happens in this situation, the authorities go, oh dear, oh that's unpleasant, oh anyway, and they let them go to the workhouse to have something to eat, and then off they went. But as you say, we're now talking about the 1880s. It's kind of the height of Victorian moralism. So the policeman in question, he's a very committed Methodist. In his role as part of the harbour police force, I think you get the sense he has a sense of the quayside as being full of vice and villainy and ungodliness, and that kind of that high moral behaviour is definitely part of it. If they'd arrived here decades before, I think you're right, they probably would have been on the way home before the end of the day. But something's changed.
That's fascinating, really, because it is. I can see why both stories are ones that kind of fascinate people, because I think we tend to be drawn to stories of like human extremes and survival and things like that. But then when you've got this huge moral question of what would one do in that scenario, which is a really extreme scenario. When it comes to you talked about in the Mignonette one, there's been a little bit of, I'm trying to understand the idea of the sort of the custom of the sea thing. Does it link in with the idea of kind of drawing straws, like someone?
Exactly, yes.
Right.
And there's the custom of the sea as it's meant to be practiced, and the custom of the sea as it generally was practiced. And the custom of the sea is meant to be, as you say, you draw straws from the captain to the lowliest cabin boy, all take their chance, and the loser goes, oh dear, never mind, fair's fair, good luck lads, crack on. In real life though, generally it's the people without power, so it's very often black sailors get picked first, very often it is cabin boys, very often it's those who are already sort of infirm or weak or considered not relevant to their survival, and yes, there's a mismatch between the custom and the reality actually.
This idea of drawing straws and the custom of the sea crops up in an earlier case from the 1830s, which we briefly touched upon there, but I found out a bit more detail in an article in the Wexford Independent from the 16th of January 1836, which tells us that a yacht called the Francis Spate of Limerick left New Brunswick on the 24th of November 1835. On the night of the 2nd of December, she got into difficulty in rough seas, and the mate and 2 men were drowned, and all their provisions were lost. The article goes on to say, and I quote, "They remained in this dreadful condition from the night of the 3rd to the 8th, when, finding it impossible to sustain themselves any longer without food, they came to the dreadful resolution of drawing lots which should be killed to sustain the survivors. We're then told that one unlucky fellow was killed, and the survivors fed on him. Later, another man became quote-unquote deranged, and he also fell victim to necessity. The same later happened to another man on board. On the morning of the 23rd day, they were finally rescued by a brig called the Anganora and treated with brotherly hospitality on board. And eventually they landed safely at Falmouth.
It is striking that in the 1884 story, they've discussed it and gone no. Like, despite their thirst and despite their hunger, they were not willing to actually pursue the custom of the sea. It's only when Richard Parker, the cabin boy, he's been told not to, but he just drinks that water, and then he's on the way out, and almost the decision is sort of given to them on a platter.
Okay, so it becomes a sort of more tempting idea when they go, actually, well, you've then got a very ill person, and then you've got to either try and look after them or, yeah.
And he was definitely dying, I think.
Okay.
Like, there's no way. They're already on the edge. That amount of salt in his body. He was slipping in and out of consciousness. He was getting weaker and worse and worse and worse. And people often ask me on the tours, well, why not let him die and then crack on? But I think the reality is what they wanted was to drink his blood.
Okay.
It was thirst that was their major concern.
Yeah.
And if he dies, it coagulates, becomes a bit more tricky. Whereas if you open up his arteries, open up his veins, you can drink. And I think they had a practical reason to wield the knife when they did. It's interesting that the two that did, Captain Dudley and Edwin Stevens, both of them had families back in England. They had children, they had dependents. The one guy that stayed out of it, Edmund Brooks, he ate his share, but he didn't get involved with the use of the knife, and he didn't have dependents. Maybe that's relevant, but when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, when they're facing legal consequences for this, he turns witness against them for the prosecution. Yeah. Even though he spent 21 days in that boat with them, even though he ate his share, he's still willing to sort of slip out of the noose, as it were, and point the finger. Yes. Amazing.
And it sounds like it could have been a close call in terms of decision, because am I right in thinking that initially that they were sentenced to be executed for it?
Yes.
But then that was commuted?
Yes, to 6 months in prison with no hard labour.
That's quite a contrast.
People were like, what? How does that make any sense? And I think the sentence that murder deserves is to be hanged, but even those that wanted them to be found guilty had a level of understanding of their situation, as a level of empathy, and in many respects it wasn't them facing the full wrath of the law, it was the custom of the sea. And for years the government, the judiciary, had wanted a case like this to make it clear to everyone, the custom of the sea has no weight, you cannot use that to defend yourself. A few years earlier, a similar case had happened in Singapore, where a British ship turned up, very similar story. It almost came to court in Britain, and there were sort of particular reasons why it didn't. And if it had, and the decision had been reached there, then that would have been it, really. I'm sure Dudley and Stevens wouldn't have been upfront about it, because it would be clear that it's illegal. But that Singaporean case never came to court, and so it was Dudley and Stevens' unfortunate place in life to be the hook upon which that legal question was hung. But as you say, they did get a level of kindness. They were given 6 months in prison. But Dudley, for the rest of his life, was angry about it. He never accepted the justice of it. He ended up emigrating to Sydney with his family anyway, and he had a pretty great time, set up a little business, and then 6 years later a disease epidemic rolls through Sydney and he dies. So he doesn't really have a happy ending, although it could have been worse. Stevens becomes a pauper. He becomes an alcoholic, basically. He just drops out. I think one of the obvious consequences of trauma is he just kind of falls apart. And then Brooks, the guy that turns traitor, he becomes a professional freak, and he makes a living in freak shows as a cannibal of the high seas, eating raw meat in front of audiences, which, I don't know, is maybe the worst of the three outcomes, really.
Yeah, that's quite a turnaround, isn't it? From being the guy who's kind of turned witness against them.
I mean, he's described as being a bad guy, basically. Like, even before they sailed, he had a bad reputation. He swore quite a lot, apparently, which is obviously a terrible sign of someone's character at the time. So he had a bit of a reputation, and he lived up to it.
Do we get a sense of how the people in Falmouth kind of felt about it all?
So when they were dropped off in Falmouth, they were brought in on this German ship, the Montezuma, I think is how you pronounce it, and a local pilot brings it into the harbour, as is legally necessary. He's then told about it, he meets them, he then disembarks, he then goes to the pub, he then goes, "Oh, everyone, you'll never guess what I've just heard on this ship." And then by the time our 3 men are disembarked at Barracks Quay, which is, if you're in Falmouth on High Street, up the hill, there's like a beautiful staircase down towards the water. Bottom of that is Barracks Quay. And by the time the men are disembarked there's already a crowd of people. And so Falmouth, is kind of ready for them, and they have questions yelled at them. It's kind of, they kind of have to defend themselves immediately. But from my understanding, when they explained, "Oh no, he drank water, he was dying," people in Falmouth were like, "Wait, never mind, cool, we're on your side." And from then on, they've kind of got people's backing. And when it came to their imprisonment in Falmouth ahead of their first trial, John Burton, who was a very famous shop filled with interesting things from around the world that sailors would sell him, he paid their bail basically in return for getting their dinghy and their knife. And so the people of Falmouth kind of turned up for them. And people in maritime communities across the nation also were kind of on their side, because in a maritime world there are certain expectations, and they got it. It's the newspaper columnists in London who often felt differently, who were judging them by different standards. But yeah, people in Falmouth, after they answered those questions on Barracks Quay, they were good.
Okay, so it was really just down to that policeman who was...
Yeah, I think he was... It just takes one, doesn't it, sometimes? A bit of a job's worth, maybe. I would say at this moment I should probably recommend a book called The Custom of the Sea. I can't remember the name of the writer, but a lot of what I'm saying I read in that book. So
That's cool.
if anyone's interested in that stuff, go find the book, because it's really narratively interesting. You can tell I've retained a lot of it because it's good stuff. So.
I'll pop a link to it in the show notes and stuff so people can check it out.
Right.
I feel like, because we were sort of chatting about this before we started recording, I feel like when we're kind of like recording and stuff on locations, I like giving a context of where we are is quite nice. We were chatting about how this is basically an old graveyard.
Yes.
We're sat in.
Yes.
Do we have any idea of like how far back the graveyard goes, like in terms of like when it was being used from?
So this particular patch, I'm not sure. The church we can see at the bottom of the hill there, that was first built in the 1660s. It's named King Charles the Martyr to suck up to the newly restored Charles II. It's royalist Falmouth saying, "Oh, your poor father, what a martyr. Let's name our church in his honour." Around the same time, Falmouth gets its town charter from the king. Maybe not a coincidence, but so from then you have a graveyard sort of just behind it, obviously, and we're sat kind of a fair bit up the hill, and so over the next 200 years it kind of expands upwards. So when this particular patch begins to be used, I'm not sure, but
Okay.
it was the 1850s that they realised it was a little bit full up and closed it. So,
Yeah, so we're probably in the sort of 19th century
yes,
ish
I
part
imagine.
of it.
Maybe late 1700s, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
And it said it's about 1850 they kind of realised it's just massively overcrowded.
There was a real sort of public health scare
Okay.
because the idea that public health was something that governments should worry about was kind of coming into vogue,
Yeah.
and cholera, was the bane of many communities in the mid-1800s, and Falmouth really suffered. There's some really interesting descriptions of the one well at the bottom of Falmouth where all these people from all these higgledy-piggledy alleyways and yards, all these people packed in together at one well on what's now Well Lane, that's described as often overflowing with human effluence. At the bottom of the hill there were certain processes that rendered it not hugely drinkable, and so the cholera would spread through Falmouth, and at the time there's a real concern about bad air, all that sort of thing, and there are these lurid descriptions of this particular graveyard literally overflowing with human remains, and that bones would find their way out of the ground during heavy rain, and you couldn't open up the ground to bury someone without coming across lots of other people, and sorry to bother you, we'll try somewhere else. And they're going around with a spear sort of probing the ground, and there's descriptions of strange fluid almost leaking out of the ground sometimes. I could go on. It was clear, I think, by the 1850s that it was not good for public health to have this place packed with any more people.
I suppose it gives you a sense of what perhaps living conditions had been like before people start to become maybe more hyper aware of this at a certain point in the Victorian period. That I guess when you've got people come to and fro the packet ships, but people constantly coming in. I guess, do you think Falmouth would have been quite packed in sort of small streets at that time?
Yeah, I mean, if you go find the OS map from 1880, which you can find online quite easily, you can just see the density all the way through Falmouth, or the dense maze, like many places in Britain around the world, a dense maze of houses and tenements, slums, all sort of thrown together. And it's been full of blackened hovels that rise out of the water. There's descriptions of Falmouth being somewhere of dirt, noise, restlessness, impatience and expectation. Is how Robert Southey, the poet, puts it. But yes, the dirt is number one on his list. And Falmouth, that's just the way it was. But then in the 1930s, again, there's a kind of public housing, which people often think of as a post-war thing, but there was this kind of process happening. And a lot of places had slum clearances. I mean, in Oxford, quite a lot of South Oxford was cleared away, and it's all over the country. But in Falmouth, they really went to town. You even get a report from a guy from the Ministry of Health saying, hey, some of these houses aren't slum. Some of these are quite nice cob cottages, looked after well, people that live there are happy, these aren't slums. And then yet you find the hand of urban renewal sweep through the town. A lot of people get moved on towards now Old Hill, where I live, and moved into houses up there. And you do read letters from people saying, oh my goodness, I've got an outdoor toilet, I've got electricity, there's definite winners. But if you go to the History Archive in Falmouth in the Poly, you can read letters from people saying, I don't want to move, this is my home. And I think most people in Falmouth don't really realise how much it's changed. I think it looked a little bit more like St Ives, perhaps. Like there is something kind of quaint about tiers of higgledy-piggledy cottages, but where they often were, you now have more modern buildings.
Yeah, I think it's always the thing that fascinates me and frustrates me when you hear about. I find it the same when I looked at. I used to live in London, and I was fascinated for a while about the history of particularly East London. And obviously, you've got the slum clearances in the sort of late 19th century, early 20th century. But along with that, sometimes you can get so frustrated because you've got really ancient buildings, old buildings that kind of get swept away with it all as well, and you kind of go, if only. But it's just, they're not seeing it from that perspective. They just kind of go, no, out with the old, in with the new. I imagine that was probably the case in Falmouth as well.
Yeah, I have photographs on my tour that I share, which you look at them and you go, that's a really nice cottage. That would be a lucrative Airbnb if it still existed. But there's also some lovely chapels. There's 3 beautiful old chapels and churches in Falmouth, but they all got torn down. And you think, the mid-20th century was a weird time, I think, for buildings, wasn't it? Kind of.
Yeah.
Urban spaces got a hammering, which, Falmouth hasn't weathered it too badly, but some places have. So.
I mean, it's funny, really, because coming into Falmouth, I think people who know the town now will kind of see there are some old buildings, and it's a very characterful place in many ways. It's a very picturesque place. I think people wouldn't necessarily think of it looking completely different, say 100, 150 years ago.
So it's something I struggle to know whether to bring it up on my walking tours, because I find this interesting, but is that just because I live here? Do tourists care? Is that interesting if you're visiting from Solihull for a week? I don't know why I choose Solihull as an example, but so some tours I bring it up, sometimes I don't. I kind of have to read the room a little bit.
Just sense the vibe of the demographic you've got and what they... Yeah, I think it's interesting to me because just one, I'm a bit of a history geek, and I'm always kind of looking for the roots of things, and I'm interested in the way that landscapes change and the way that towns change and evolve, but I think it's that sort of 8-year-old in me that kind of goes, I wish I had a time machine and I could see it as it looked.
Yes.
I think it's partly that part of me, that sort of inner child that's going, well, yeah, I kind of would love to have seen it as it once it looked. I think that's partly it as well.
Yes. It's that itch that will never really be scratched.
No.
It's like
but I imagine looking at going to the archives and looking at some of the old maps and some of the old pictures kind of becomes a fascinating insight at the same time.
It's that feeling of almost getting there. I think that's the kind of the bittersweet ache of being really interested in history is there are moments where you have a flash and you feel it and you see it and you have a sense that I'm touching it, I'm on it, and then it almost for me just it fades in an instant. I've had a history high. And that's what we live for. People like you and me at least.
Hope you're enjoying the episode. If you are, then don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. Maybe consider leaving a review, which can help other people to discover the series and also helps this project to grow. If you'd like to help support the series further, then please consider checking out my Patreon page at patreon.com/The Pisky Trap. This project is completely independent and it's funded by myself, along with the help of listener support. From as little as £1 a month, pledges on Patreon help me to cover the running costs and purchase books, materials, and gain access to historical archives as part of the research for each episode. So if you can help by offering a monthly pledge on Patreon, that'd be amazing. If not, no worries. Just continuing to spread the word among friends and on social media is also a real help. Okay then, that's enough of that. Let's get back to the episode. Having looked at some of the old things like photographs and things that are available, do you find that helpful when you're giving the tours and being able to actually conjure up what some places would have looked like? Do you think that helps in terms of your ability to then kind of convey that to audiences?
I think I every few months I have to go and look at stuff and look at the sources and look at the photographs to kind of renew my sense of it, because it so easily just becomes a script.
Right.
Because I've given these tours hundreds of times in various different ways, but like, you know, people are standing there and I'm often thinking about dinner later. I'm able to give what sounds like a really good tour without really being present, because it's work, because it's my living, and you know, you can't be fully in it at every moment. And so sometimes I'm just reeling it out and I'm almost performing passion, and it is authentic passion, but I'm not feeling it because I can't feel it every week of every month of every year. So there's moments where I think, oh gosh, I've kind of lost it. I've let myself just turn this into a script and just turn this place into a kind of backdrop for me to kind of say words in return for money, and I have to go and look at the photographs and feel it and feel that kind of, you mentioned like the 8-year-old self, feel that kind of, oh wow, cool, this stuff happened here, this place used to be like this, and this happened, and at the same time that happened. And it doesn't take too much for me to kind of reawaken it, and kind of, it almost tops me up and keeps this a really wonderful way to earn a living.
That makes sense, because I guess reinvigorating that then translates to the audience's reaction. When
they
you
feel it.
Feed off their energy as well, then that makes it, as having been a performer myself, it's that energy that you get from them, there's a real kind of, it's its own reward in so many ways, because you kind of go, oh, it's like you really remember why you do those sorts of things.
And there's so many ways people can be pensive or angry or numb, or you know, there's all the various forms of human energy. Curiosity and oh wow is one of the most lovely, and like I get to spend my time basking in it. Not every tour, but when you see someone, they see this town in a new way. Like they've just come on holiday, you're here for some dinner, seagulls, yachts, Cornwall, tick, 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 tick. And when you say, no, it's not just that, it's something else. Let me take you deeper.
Yeah.
And not everybody, as I say, but usually on the tour there's at least a couple of people that are feeling it, and to spend my time with that energy, even if I'm saying the same words, is a great privilege, really.
I suppose the one thing I'm curious about is how did the project start, really?
So I just moved here end of 2019. I didn't really settle into Falmouth life. I was still a bit lost, really. And then lockdown happened, and of course, you know, we didn't have much on, and so I just ended up reading a lot about Falmouth history and realising how amazing it is, because it starts with the Killigrew family. It starts with literal pirates. I mean, it's you're off with a bang, and then it just stays amazing from there. And I've done Amdram, I've done the whole standing on a stage trying to be entertaining thing, and it hit me that there was a marrying together of two done. That people have done it in decades previous. I've met a couple of people. An old bloke came up to me, I didn't get his name, but he said, oh, I used to do this when back in the 1980s, I did it. as a packet captain, and we had a little chat about his route, and it was amazing. But it wasn't being done when I was here, so it suddenly hit me as a possibility, and it was very much a side hustle. And then my aim was always that it should transcend being just something for people like you and me. It should be something that someone can visit Falmouth who's not that into history, and they can go on it and go, wow, I'm really glad I did. And that it will be entertainment, and that it's narrative, and that it's not just information. And I think that's happening, and but it's now my full-time living, and that's a consequence of enough people buying tickets. And we do a ghost tour now, which kind of leans into the darker side of it. And yes, it's I started off as a stiff history nerd, really, kind of being quite fact-based, and I've found a joy for the narrative. It's the gap between the facts. It's the energy between the true statements that makes this joyful, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, because that was going to be my question, was that you always had that passion for history. And I suppose for me, it's from the podcast point of view, I'm often starting with a story, and I've got this piece of folklore, and then I'm kind of trying to find the hard history behind it and go, where does this story come from, or how did it evolve? And sometimes you don't get that, but what you do get is, where does the storytelling tradition come from, at least? And I imagine, do you encounter that quite a bit in Falmouth as well, that there are lots of local stories that have evolved over the centuries or over the decades, and you kind of go, or do you find it equally fascinating trying to find the roots of these?
I mean, I used to work in the unexploded ordnance hazard assessment industry,
right?
Where it's a very, very niche job. Basically, if you're having a construction project done in the UK, you can pay someone to research the military history of that particular plot of land in great detail and give you a risk assessment as to how likely it is that a German bomb or a British munitions stash is within it. And so my bread and butter was researching military history and then communicating it in reports. And the frequency that you would find absolute nonsense being spoken on local forums, saying, oh, Hitler bombed this field because he had a grudge against that cow because of 1936, or complete guff is the word I'm going to use. And so that made me really cynical about kind of the oral traditions of places, because I was like, people like a story and then they run with it. And there's a good example with the very famous story up near Penryn, a farm called Bohelland, where you're nodding because you know the story of...
I looked it up this morning.
Oh, really? Yes.
The story that we alluded to in the conversation there, which is linked with a farm called Bohelland, is often known as the Penryn tragedy, or occasionally the Bohelland tragedy. Now, although it's based further upriver from Falmouth, I think it's a story worth talking about in more detail. Baring Gould writes that in the parish of Gluvius by Penryn is the house of Bohelland. He says it was historically known as Behethlin. The story surrounding it appears in a pamphlet entitled News from Penryn in Cornwall, 1618, which is in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. We're told that the owner of Bohelland was a man of consideration and substance, and his youngest son, weary of life on land, decides to go away to sea. The story gets a little bit long-winded from here, but suffice to say, he has lots of adventures over the years whilst he's away at sea. 15 years pass, and then one day the man returns home from sea. He finds that his sister is married to a mercer, and that his family's fortunes have taken a turn for the worse over the years, and his parents are eking out a living. At first, he appears as a stranger to his sister, but then reveals his true identity, and confides in her that he has gold and jewels with him that he's brought back from his adventures at sea. He then goes to visit his parents, who he hasn't seen for many years, and they don't recognize him. But the old couple take pity on this friendly stranger and welcome him in to stay the night with them. Now, for some reason in the story, he decides to keep his identity a secret from his parents, in order to kind of reveal this later as a surprise. In gratitude for letting him stay, the young man gives his mother a gold coin. He's then shown to his bedroom, where he soon falls asleep. Tempted by the fact that the young man clearly has gold on him, the mother persuades the father that they should steal his money, and that night they sneak into the room and murder him, taking his gold and jewels. The next morning, the father meets with his daughter, and she asks after the young man who's been staying with them, and reveals to him the secret that it's her long-lost brother and their son. In disbelief, the man hurries upstairs and identifies the young man by a scar from a sword cut on his arm, which he had received when a youth. Racked by guilt and driven to despair by what he's done, the old man takes his own life. Then the mother finds both the father and the son, realizes what's happened, and takes her life. And shortly after this, heartbroken by the loss of her family, we're told that the sister also died. So it really is a tragic story. Peter Underwood, in his book Ghosts of Cornwall, mentions the story. He says the events took place in a pub near Penryn, though in the earlier versions of the story I can't find mention of a pub. But he says that for many years following these events, the place was reported to be unquiet at dead of night. Heavy thumps and bangs sounded in the stillness. Strange whisperings were borne away on the night air, and terrifying sighs and groans disturbed the quiet of night and echoed in the darkness.
It's presumably got some truth to it, but we know where that farm is. We can find it on maps, and yet I've had so many people in Penryn say, "Oh, it's that building, that house," and it's, their granddads told them that, and So I guess what I'm saying in response to your question is, no, I'm cynical about things that people say because it so quickly gets distorted, I think.
Immediately that you were sort of talking about that, thinking about the plot for that story in many ways, there's something that really reminded me of it. Early in the podcast, I had a chat with a woman called Leslie from a place called Chambercombe Manor up near Ilfracombe. And there's a story there about there was a secret room that was found. And in there they'd found this skeleton lying on a bed in this secret room. The story behind it is that there was this family of wreckers or smugglers that had owned Chambercombe or were renting the Chambercombe back in the 17th century, and their daughter had been away in Ireland and married this Irish captain, and there'd been this wrecker down on the coast, so the family go down and kind of loot the wreck, and they find this woman who's barely alive, take her back, and then basically she's kind of sealed up in the room, and only afterwards do they find out it's their own daughter. So I wonder if there's like a very similar storytelling theme. I have to wonder if there's just sort of like these travelling droll tellers and storytellers that go around, and it's sort of little regional variations
it's
find
like,
their way.
I'm from Witney in West Oxfordshire, and there's an old ruin of a medieval hall, and there's the great story of on the wedding day, one of the girl who's going to marry into the Lovell family, they're playing hide and seek, and she gets locked in a chest in the attic, and then she's mummified in this chest. And that story is in about half a dozen medieval halls around England. And I think a lot of history, especially if you're into like classical history and classical antiquities, you just see these narrative patterns that get reapplied about the kind of the strong king, or the king that doesn't listen to his advisors, or there's this particular kind of just frames that history gets kind of hung on to. My slightly cynical answer a minute ago, I guess, is slightly informed by that. I think, I'm always scared of the storytelling energy, because that's kind of what I've become, is a storyteller rather than a historian. I'm not an academic historian. I don't have research skills equivalent to people that are true historians. What I am is a storyteller, but I'm always terrified of finding myself too far away from fact and actually standing in a field of projection and making things what I want them to be because it sounds good, and no one would care. People would like it, but I hadn't even realised it till we started having this conversation. It's coming to my mind as I'm speaking, but it's important to me that I'm not just regurgitating something that isn't true. I think.
Yeah.
So, but a dog is coming to visit. So yes, we have a new guest on the podcast.
But yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean, because I think I find it can be so easy to, and I find this often with things like, if I'm doing something for the podcast around sort of, say, particularly like ghost stories or local legends, often you'll find the same things sort of like are perpetuated online. But then I feel a kind of duty to, that's what I feel, partly a duty to kind of try and research and delve a little bit deeper to kind of go, why are these stories important? Why should we keep telling them? Because they must have come from somewhere, even if it's lost in the midst of time. It must have been at least important to the communities who were telling them for some reason.
Yes, it's and maybe fact, but it has got fact to it because, as you say, it mattered.
Yeah, and whether it's a kind of like, there was a shipwreck and it's a kind of community's way of dealing with the fallout of that, or you could easily speculate, the origins of some of these things. But yeah, I always feel like a duty to kind of, like you say, kind of ground it in some kind of fact or research, or to at least of trying to do that research to kind of lend weight to it, I suppose.
It's hard to do that.
It is, yeah.
Because online things just get regurgitated.
Yeah.
And if you Google something, often you read the same bit of information that's been spread from blog to blog to blog, and I mean, there are people like Elizabeth Dale who does the hard yards and like does the work, and it's really great research stuff. But often you kind of look something up and you're like, why am I even still looking? Because it's not on the internet. Like, it's in a book. It's in a library somewhere, and to go to the library and find the book is actual graft, isn't it?
That's it. I think that's why I'm quite old school in many ways, in that I'm normally surrounded by piles of books on the desk. I sort of live amongst them, but I think we're, in some ways, we're kind of lucky now because a lot of things have been digitized, so you can access certain archives and certain things. So that's been really helpful too. So I think, I don't know about you, but I find that I'm starting to build a little thing of, I think I've got that digital book somewhere. I'm just going to cross-reference that, and so that's become a little bit easier. But I do still like going into Cress and Kernow because, again, I think that it's almost like the 8-year-old watching Indiana Jones part of me goes, I'm uncovering something in an archive or solving a puzzle in a way.
I think this isn't relevant to Cornwall at all, but when I was doing my bomb research job in the National Archives, and there was a whole report about a bomb in 1917 that blew up in Dover Harbour, and it was, a bit of shrapnel went into HMS so-and-so and stuck in the wood frame of a bed. And I was like, okay, whatever, and I turned the page, and there's an envelope, and I open the envelope, and that bit of shrapnel falls out into my hand. I was like, oh my goodness! That was presumably smelted in the Ruhr somewhere, and and a Zeppelin carried it over, and you wouldn't get that online. That was an archive. That was an Indiana Jones moment for me.
Definitely, you are literally touching history. You can't get much closer than that.
That's a history high.
It is, yeah.
The thing I want to get to the bottom of, actually, and maybe someone listening will say, we already know the answer to this, Will, what are you talking about? But if I say Amy the figurehead, do you know who I mean or what I mean?
I don't know.
In down bottom of Falmouth, down Upton Slip, just near the water, there is a very striking figurehead that's placed in the Ope, and she is known as Amy. I'm not sure where that came from. And the story told is that she was the figurehead of the Royal Mail paddle steamer the Amazon, which in its maiden voyage in the 1850s blew up in the Bay of Biscay, and we know for a fact that wreckage washed up at Swampole Beach and other places along the south coast of Cornwall and Devon. And the story is that she was the figurehead, but when you read the local newspaper articles, they don't mention a figurehead, they just say wreckage. And I think they would mention a very striking woman's kind of head, and I'm just convinced it's one of those things that people have just sort of made up. And I don't. There's an answer. I think she's been there since the 1930s, I believe. So she's been there a while, but that's 80 years after the wreck. So if that was the case, where was she before? And this is a good example of something that I just need to put some time. Unless someone's listening to this going, "Oh, I know the answer, Will. You idiot. Let me message you. If so, please do, because that'll save me some time."
Yeah, because it makes you wonder if it wasn't from that particular vessel, then where did it come from, and how did that story develop?
Yes, because it's not in a vacuum, is it? It's come from somewhere, and so maybe I'm overcomplicating it. Maybe the answer is it was from the Amazon, and in a way I'd be happy if that was the case, because I've told many tourists about this before. I've prefaced it with I'm not so sure about this, but I'd like to think I wasn't telling them complete nonsense.
But it'd be nice to be able to kind of put a stamp on that and go like verified.
Yes, exactly.
In a way. As someone who kind of knows only a small amount about the history around here, really, I wonder if we could go back to kind of the beginning. I feel like we can't avoid talking about the Killigrews a little bit, because
they demand it.
Everyone loves the Killigrews in one way or another.
Yes.
They crop up. I was reading, this is the kind of geek I am, I spent over breakfast, I was reading Sabine Baring Gould, who's kind of like Cornish characters and strange
songs.
And it does.
He went to Flushing, I think. Collected a great ghost story, basically. So, yes.
I have to ask you about that.
Yes.
But he was kind of talking about. It was mainly focused about Mary Killigrew, I suppose. But I'm just intrigued about just how Falmouth developed as a town, because I kind of hadn't considered this when I was younger. That obviously, like, am I right to think if Penryn is there much earlier?
Yes, 1200s.
Right.
Is Penryn. I mean, it feels medieval, the streets of Penryn now. So yes, Penryn was the original town, and at that point, Falmouth was just green fields, but with kind of a lot of potential, because this harbour is one of the greatest harbours in Europe. It's famously the third deepest natural harbour in the world. And I'm not a sailor, even though I wear a pirate hat every day. I'm a complete imposter, but I believe it's a wonderful place for a mariner. It's kind of very sheltered. You can get in and out no matter what the tides are doing. The winds aren't always propitious. The southerly gales can still cause you issues, but it's a fantastic harbour that has been used since human beings sailed from and around this island, I imagine. And yet Penryn's a little way up. You know, if you sail in here, you've got to keep going to get to Penryn, or you've got to go all the way to Truro. I mean, it used to be a huge amount of seagoing vessels that go all the way up to Truro. And why not build that town initially a bit closer? And the answer being, well, you're at risk of enemy raids, you're at risk of being attacked. Penryn would have a chain that it would draw across the mouth of its harbour to protect it. But Falmouth was waiting to be started. And the people we have to thank for it, yes, are the Killigrew family, who we could talk about for hours, because there's the Falmouth Killigrews that are my focus, but there's also lots of very interesting Killigrews at court. Charles II had a wit who was a Killigrew, who would say sort of incredibly challenging, rude things to him about his kingship, and he would get away with it because he was so witty. There's these various more respectable Killigrews, but the Falmouth Killigrews were, by and large, total rogues and the sort of characters that burst forth from the history books.
So is it Sir John Killigrew who kind of is not the first Killigrew, but the one who gets talked about a lot, I suppose, with regards to the sort of setting up of the town?
So there are 4 John Killigrews in a row, right. All very interesting in their own rights. There were John Killigrews in generations previous, actually, but we often call the first one of these the first, at least I do in my tours, because it's when it all gets quite interesting, basically. In what's now Falmouth, the oldest building is this old manor house, Wenach, and it was here for hundreds of years. There was an Arwenack family that in the 1300s, the Killigrews sort of married into it and ended up in the house. And generations pass, and they're Cornish gentry, and so I imagine, Carew has this lovely description of the Cornish gentry visiting each other, and then they'd all visit somebody else, and like a snowball, they would kind of grow and grow and grow as the party got bigger. And I imagine the Killigrews were part of those lovely snowballing days. But then Pendennis Castle gets built on Pendennis Headland, and that's in the 1540s. It's King Henry VIII, it's the Tudors. It's fears of England being attacked by the French or whoever. And so Pendennis Castle is built, and suddenly on the doorstep of this manor house is this new fortification, and the Crown says to John Killigrew, do you fancy running it? You're just down the road, your establishment, we can trust you, can't we? And so he becomes captain of Pendennis Castle. And I do occasionally like to imagine that evening when he's found out that news, when I presume a messenger came from London and delivered the news. Maybe he was in London himself at the time, they often went up and down. But either way, he must have sat in his chair that evening and thought, oh my goodness, things have changed. He got a level of power that gave him control of the harbour and control of the sea beyond at a time when there's Spanish silver floating about, and it's a tumultuous time of religious strife, and he's an ideological Protestant. He's got power, he's got a willingness to take risks. He's in Cornwall, which is still a long way from London, but definitely felt it in the 1500s, and he basically just goes for it and sails the ocean's blue, or the English Channel at least, with his sons, waging a kind of private war against Spanish shipping. One historian, whose name I've forgotten to my shame, but he puts it as it's a mixture of Protestantism, patriotism and plunder. And yes, he really makes the best of it. When he dies, his son takes over, and he's worse really. He's a terrible bloke, a complete criminal. It's not just the piracy, it's anything that makes any money. And famously, his wife, Mary, the daughter of a gentleman pirate from Suffolk, Wolverston is her maiden name, but she comes down here, moves into the manor, and becomes an equal partner in their criminal family business. If you Google most famous female pirates in history, she often features, because there's various stories about her where she earns herself quite the reputation. But they eventually pass out of the pages. John III turns up. He's still a bit piratey. He's more of a coward, I think. He gambles. A lot of this land gets sold off to pay his debts. And he ends up seemingly, allegedly, betraying the castle to the Spaniards at the time of the Armada, which is never proven because they never get here. But he dies in debtor's prison in London anyway, and then takes over, and he's basically a nice bloke. And according to legend, a conversation with Walter Raleigh a few decades earlier was in the back of his head. Raleigh had said, why is there not a town in this wonderful natural haven? And apparently that is what motivates John IV to get permission from the king and build 4 alehouses. And that's a short version of the Killicoos, really. Pirate, still a bit piratey, founder. It's a good narrative start to my tours, I have to say, because it's how can you say no? I mean, it's just good stuff. So.
Yeah, they seem to fascinate people, and I think I'm instantly drawn to this whole thing with Sir Walter Raleigh, because Raleigh is one of those characters that draws myths and legends to him so much that you have to wonder. I mean, I'm intrigued as to whether that was the case, but I'd love to imagine that conversation for sure. They're going, oh, you know what, this looks like a decent spot. You know what you should do.
It's funny, I was talking earlier about, I always want to talk about fact. I don't want to get too far from fact, but with this, I don't care. It's just too good, isn't it?
I want it to be true.
Well, I need to, the sources are worth checking, actually. I'm not sure where we know this, but I'm fairly sure Raleigh did come here. He's gone looking for El Dorado in modern-day Guyana, and on his way back, I think he definitely called in, and he definitely had dinner in the banqueting hall. Whether or not the conversation then took place, it is almost too good to be true.
But it's feasible.
It's feasible.
Yeah, that's good enough for me.
Yes, we'll take it.
Do you have like personal kind of favourites that you love telling? Obviously, I don't want to, because I want people to come and want to go and come on the tour, so I don't want to give too many spoilers away in terms of like tour concept. But are there particular kind of themes or stories that you love for Falmouth that you always enjoy kind of exploring?
I mean, we've discussed the Mignonette Cannibals already, and that's definitely my favourite story, but the runner-up is a wonderfully unimportant story about the primitive Methodist chapel, which is just up the road from us where we are now, where in 1885 the entire congregation had a massive falling out. And it was over the centrally important issue of who should be their choir master. And what you glean from the newspaper reports is that 2 factions emerge, tensions rise, there's 2 rival choir masters with different kind of personalities, you get the sense, and in the end it culminates in an actual full-blown fist fight with quite a few people piling in by the sounds of it. There's a black eye and a broken nose, and it's chaos. and a few of them end up in front of a magistrate. Legal charges are brought, and it happens just before Sunday service in the chapel. And I love telling that story because it's a bit of light relief. It's also, there's a message in it, I think, that it's so easy for us, even those of us that are into history, to kind of lose the raw humanity of those that once lived, and to make them more serious creatures. We see those po-faced photographs of Victorians, and we think about historical proces, and people just seem almost like agents of social change, and they're stripped of their ridiculousness often. At least just random people in a Methodist chapel are. We've no reason to look past their slightly austere religiosity. But in that moment, those primitive Methodists revealed that they are absurd, factional, flawed human beings. And I think there's something beautiful about that. And I have always said I would love to write an hour-long comedy script about that story and have it put on somewhere in Falmouth, because it's the role of a lifetime, I think. Playing one of those choir masters, I think, could be fun.
Yeah, I love stuff like that because it just reminds you that these are just people, flawed human beings, and they have their bust-ups and their falling outs and all those things. And I think, you're right, there's something slightly church-going Victorians kind of having a punch-up in the street or whatever.
In the chapel.
Or in the chapel, yeah. Even funnier. And as a fight choreographer, I'm already thinking about how would I choreograph that?
Well, I'll let you know if I ever
At what point does the pew get involved?
There's so many layers you could have.
John Wick style church
Oh man.
But I think there's so much here that's amazing to me in terms of, obviously from a Killigrew standpoint, but also just because with the packets going to and fro.
Yes.
I imagine like in the sort of the 18th century, this place was just...
It's amazing when you think of Falmouth at its peak in terms of importance. I mean, it wasn't its peak in terms of population. It's not when I'd want to live here, probably because of how dirty and full of disease it was. But the late 1700s, early 1800s, Falmouth was a very important place and one of the busiest harbours in the Northern Hemisphere. There's a great description from one of the Quaker foxes in Falmouth. He writes that you can get from one end of the harbour to the other without getting your feet wet. Supposedly the number of vessels are that large, and it's the international flavour of it as well. It's not just packet ships, it's not just packet crew who've been to international places, it's also the international people. There's lots of black sailors from the Caribbean, from Africa wandering about. You've got various people crossing the world that use Falmouth as a way station. Like the Russian ambassador to Portugal in the early 1800s comes to Falmouth and then gets a packet ship to Lisbon. And so you've got all these interesting people coming through. Benjamin Franklin comes through. Lord Byron's here for the packet ship. He wrote a great poem about his experience here, where he... Do you want a few verses?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
It's I do it quite a lot because it's just quite good. But I'll give you verse number 1 and 2. Huzzah, Hodgson, we are going! Our embargo is off at last. Favourable breezes are blowing. Bend the canvas o'er the mast. From aloft the signal's streaming. Hark, the farewell gun has fired. Women screeching, tars blaspheming, tell us that our time's expired. Here's a rascal, come to task all, prying from the customs house. Trunks and packing cases, cracking not a corner for a mouse. Escapes and searched amid the racket ere we board the Lisbon packet. Now our boatmen quit their moorings, and all hands must ply the oars. Baggage from the quay is lowering. We're impatient, push from shore. Have a care, that case holds liquor. Stop the boat, I'm sick, oh Lord. Sick, ma'am, damn, you'll be sicker ere you've spent an hour on board. Men and women, gentlemen, ladies, servants, jacks, here entangling all our wrangling. Touch the genial noise and racket ere we board the Lisbon packet. It goes on, but I'll stop there. But,
So that was my chat with Will Hazell. A big thank you to Will for taking the time to chat, and I definitely recommend checking out falmouthuncovered.co.uk, where you can find out more about the walking tours around Falmouth, and I've popped a link to that in the show notes as well. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and you found it interesting. If you'd like to get in touch, then you can email me at thepiskytrap@gmail.com. Otherwise, that's it from me for now, but we'll be back again very soon to explore another local topic. In the meantime, Take care, and thanks for listening. The Pisky Trap is presented by me, Keith Wallace, with music by Elizabeth Westcott and artwork by Caris Harrington.